Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Thursday, September the 9th already. It's 1 o'clock, isn't it? It says 2 here. All right, we'll call the meeting to order. First item is adoption of our August 26th minutes. Has everyone had a chance to read them? Are there any errors or omissions? If they're not, I'd entertain a motion to adopt them. By Justin, second by Mike. Thank you. Catherine, please call the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Mike Andrews.
Yes.
Justin Pennings.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you for that. I'll move on to disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. And I note there are none. Item 4, presentation, Elgin County options analysis discussion, IBI. And Jeff, I think you have a bit of a preamble first.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Warden. Today, IBI will further expand on both technical and funding options, as well as answer any outstanding questions or issues from our last committee meeting. IBI has provided technical options that represent the bookends of options. At one end, fiber to the home at approximately $100 million. At the other end is a fiber to fixed wireless towers at approximately $15 million. We will be relying on committee guidance to help inform what is a reasonable solution. For example, 50% of the county with fixed or fiber to the home within the next 5 years, and the remainder addressed with fixed wireless, or something along those lines. Once we determine the desired outcomes, IBI will further expand on recommendations and address how these recommendations relate to each independent municipality. That's really all I have, and if there are no questions, we can hand it over to IBI for their discussion.
Thank you, Jeff. IBI, welcome. The floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Keith. With IBI, I'll introduce my colleagues, John George and Jason McBeath. This presentation is a brief presentation entitled to provide some supplementary information from the last presentation and report that came to this committee that elaborated in more detail around the options, and really to serve as a discussion material for this committee to further evaluate the options presented. I'll quickly move through the material that we'll present. Today it should be a relatively short formal presentation. We will provide an update on the survey results from the additional survey results that the county has undertaken. This from the survey the county's undertaken, and a review of those versus the existing current state data that we've collected. We'll bring back some information as a follow-up to last meeting regarding the tower co-location process and some additional elaboration on funding options that are available to the county. So jumping right into the first agenda item, actually first the context. So again, it's a supplement to the material of August 26th, and the disclaimer that we have here in terms of the level of planning and cost estimation that's been undertaken. Now we'll jump in to the mapped survey results. I'm going to rely on my colleague Jason McBeath to take us through the findings as presented in these slides. We have a slide developed for each municipality, and we'll spend probably more time on the first one, orienting you to what you're seeing on the page. and then step through them by each municipality. So Jason, perhaps if you could just provide us an overview of the information that's being presented on this slide.
Sure, thanks, Keith, you bet. So on these slides, both surveys have been plotted and the information is presented. So the first survey is undertaken previously, and then the second survey, of course, is more recent information. The results are broken down into three categories for each survey. It's under 25 megabits per second, 25 to 50 megabits per second, and over 50 megabits per second. And then it's just visualized throughout the areas. The combined survey results summary sort of elaborates upon overall findings and what we found. So in served areas, we found that isolated individual customers are experiencing 50 megabits per second within the service zones. You know, in the denser small towns, the occurrence of adequate test results, of course, increases. But we also found within the serviced areas that the green plotted lines we're finding a lot of inadequate test results came into play as well in both the first and second surveys. Of course, once we get into why those test results may be inadequate, there are a lot of factors at play, and the report will contain more of those details. As far as the underserved areas go, we found a lot more validation in the underserved areas, in that generally the areas we had noted as underserved outside of municipal centers are being validated, that of course people are not getting good internet speeds achieved out in those areas. There are a few fringe cases, of course, where good speeds are being achieved essentially in the middle of nowhere. And that can be attributed to a few things. Notably, there were a few results identified that were low Earth orbit technologies, colloquially known as Starlink or the SpaceX project. And they were generally achieving very strong speeds on that network, but were very isolated cases. 7 were identified full county wide in this second set of survey data. The smaller photos, the inset photos, are a little bit of a zoomed in of some of the municipal centers for independent review to get an idea if we're seeing valid test results, adequate test results within those small communities scattered throughout the county. I think that covers the slide, Keith.
Good, thank you. So, I mean, I think in summary, and I think it's fair to say consistent across all the municipalities, that what the second survey is illuminating would be that for the most part, the underserved areas are being revalidated or validated as underserved. Some of the areas that where service is noted or understood to be available, perhaps there are some pockets or individual cases that where service isn't available. Difficult to attribute each individual case or generalize them. It could very well be the case that there's no service available. It could be an individual issue related to the subscriber's actual service that they've purchased, the service provider, or right down to the state of their home network, the Wi-Fi network within their home, and the level of service they're experiencing when connected to that Wi-Fi network. So I'll pause here just in terms of questions on approach and general results, and then we can step through each of the visuals for each of the municipalities.
Any questions for Keith? A question, Duncan, or are you tuning in? I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm just happy as a clam in my parking lot office.
Thank you. Okay, Keith, go
All
ahead.
right, very good. We'll proceed. If we could step through the next slides. I know we provided these slides in advance, so we won't spend much time on them. But generally, the I think the general theme that that Jason described is consistent as we step through each of these municipalities. Yeah, thank you. Next slide. So we can certainly come back to any questions that may bubble up through our later discussion, but that concludes agenda topic 1 in terms of the additional survey results and mapping. The second agenda topic that we wanted to discuss is related to questions that arose from the last meeting regarding the tower co-location process and the industry-related processes to co-locate on existing tower structures. I'm going to ask my colleague John to speak to this as he's done some of the additional background work and has had some follow-up discussions with at least one industry player on this matter. So John, over to you.
Sure, thank you. So as the slide indicates, the co-location of antennas and towers is an acceptable practice within the existing community.
John, your audio is quite unclear to me. I'll call it that. I'm not sure if that's the same case for everyone, but I just wanted to flag it before we get too far in.
Yeah, just a moment. I'm not sure, but is that any better?
It seems to be slightly better. We'll maybe proceed on that basis unless it's anyone else is concerned with being able to understand you.
Okay, thank you. So the tower location or co-location process was found to be an acceptable practice within the existing carriers. I was able to connect with the senior or the national director of real estate co-location group at Rogers, and had a good conversation with her. I think of the towers that we looked at, approximately 8 of them were Rogers towers, so a good portion of the potential towers that we'd be looking at. She did confirm that the approach for the process is, number one, to confirm their locations and submit a list of towers to their group. They would in turn review those towers to determine whether or not there's even availability of space on the towers. The next piece would be handled when we get into detailed design, because that's confirming the technical compatibility. So we need to know what types of antennas we're putting on the towers, the shapes of them, the wind loading factors, and so on that are attributed to the antennas. What kind of space do we need for the radios and so on. The carrier would take that information and go back through with their technical team to assess the compatibility. Once that's established that our equipment is compatible with their locations, we would then have to connect with them to establish a co-location agreement. She indicated that the agreement was not a terribly long process, but there is a fair bit of due diligence to go through. So she indicated it was likely a multi-week process, not multi-months. So that's good news. But other carriers will fall in line, so Bell will offer the same sort of things. The practice is established. I have reached out to the CRTC regulatory body for telecommunications to ask details of any co-location requirements and mandates that the carriers must abide. I have yet to receive a response from them, but I do understand that there is an arbitration process should timelines drag on in this. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So at the last meeting, we also discussed other opportunities to leverage existing county infrastructure or municipal infrastructure, things like water tanks, any other higher antennas or towers that you might have, or infrastructure that you might have to which we could mount some antennas. So I'd suggest that the first thing we look at is alternatives. Number one, let's identify what assets the region has or the county has that we could leverage. We can run some coverage maps and predictions to determine what the approximate coverage is from those locations. Then look at other available towers in the area to supplement and fill in the gaps. And then I'd suggest if we still have gaps after that point, that we look at building our new towers. So if we can't get appropriate agreement in place with carriers, we can look at building new towers. So again, process is run some coverage maps on the existing infrastructure, identify potential existing carrier towers that could fill in and confirm that space is available with the carriers. Then go into detailed discussions with the carriers, determine in our detailed design phase, determine the equipment that we're putting on, get technical compatibility and so on. For planning purposes, then I'd suggest that what we do is, or what we consider is to set aside a contingency fund to cover up to a build of up to about 13 towers. So somewhere in the $3 to $3.25 million mark, purely as a contingency for tower builds. And once we get into the detailed design phase, and can flush through and determine which towers are and are not available and deal with, then we can assess the next steps from there. And I think that was it on the communication.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate it. So, but I guess before moving into the final agenda item, any questions on the co-location process, additional information that John has provided? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed forward. And the next slide depicts the grant funding options that we discussed or presented at the last meeting and through the report. There are a number of programs available for grant funding options. Some of them are driven by what I would call a competitive application process. So not every application that is filed is funded with a grant. So there are certain criteria based on each program. And this first slide, which is a summary of the grant funding options that were presented last time, is really just to refresh ourselves with the availability of funding options, grants, plus private equity or Canada Infrastructure Bank low interest loans. Putting a lens on that through the next slide, if we could move to it, really talks about the different eligibility. So who in effect is eligible to apply for these grants, what the intake periods are, and a bit more information around the funding allocation process. As we mentioned last time, the Ontario Connects program is a program that is just being rolled out. So we do have fairly limited information on that program. We do understand that it is targeted towards existing internet service providers only. So they would need to be the primary applicant into that program on areas within Elgin County. The ICON and UBF programs are targeted at both existing internet service providers as well as municipalities who are often partnering or making arrangements with internet service providers to operate infrastructure that they may be directly investing in as part of their grant application process. There was a significantly large intake period for both the UBF and the ICON programs in March, which ended in March earlier this year. There is not a published date for the next intake, but certainly we expect that to be likely in late 2022 on the basis of the government agencies dealing with the existing grant applications that are now in front of them. They're actually quite quite overwhelmed at this point managing the intakes and the funding announcements and getting projects contracted and in place from the last intake. This program is a highly competitive process. It is the grants are based on eligibility and project merit, so household connected, and the amount of subsidy requested. So it is in effect a competitive process. You do need to have projects that are developed to a shovel-ready state to apply into this program. So that means that preliminary engineering is usually required to understand costs at the detail levels that the program requires. And you have to have line of sight to any permits that may prevent your project from going forward when you apply. As I said, it is an oversubscribed program based on the last intake. We understand that it was oversubscribed by almost a factor of 10. So for every 10 applications being submitted, one application is being funded. The IKIP program, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure, this is primarily targeted towards municipalities, and this is a much broader program for infrastructure, where broadband has recently been included as an eligible infrastructure investment. So this one is much more, I'll say, in line with a typical infrastructure program that would fund roads, bridges, water treatment plants, etc. The Canada Infrastructure Bank and combined with private equity, certainly there's eligibility from both private sector internet service providers and municipalities. There is not per se an intake period. As projects are ready for consideration, they can be submitted and brought forward to the bank or to private equity. It's really a case of developing the project to a state where the business plan can demonstrate that there is a path to an investment for a private equity partner to see a long-term rate of return on their investment. And the infrastructure bank is looking for their due diligence as a lender, just in terms of the project criteria, costing, and the creditworthiness of the applicant. The last program that I've added here for completeness is one that's been around for a long time, formerly known as the gas tax program, the Canada Community Building Fund. As you're likely aware, this is an annual program that allocates grant funding to municipalities on a formulaic basis. And broadband is an eligible investment or item under that program. So historically, many gas tax funds are earmarked towards more traditional infrastructure, i.e. road improvement. But just to make you aware for completeness, that broadband is eligible under that program now as well. Any questions on funding options?
Not seeing any, Keith.
Okay, thank you. My last slide just summarizes our understood to be next steps in terms of a chance for the committee to provide feedback. And as Jeff alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, for us to start to move from the current state of discussion and of options towards recommendations in the September timeframe. So I'll at this point, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Keith. No further discussion before we leave? Move on? Not seeing any.
Mr. Warden,
Oh, go ahead, Duncan, sorry.
just a question to John. His audio was somewhat less than I wasn't able to hear. When he was talking to one of the major carriers, did I hear him say Rogers?
Yes, that was Rogers.
It was Rogers. Okay.
Yes.
Because just for the committee's information, there seems to be a new player in the game. One of my counselors has been approached for wireless service to her home, an antenna and a router in her house from a major carrier. Roughly, they're advertising their speed at 25 download and 5 upload, and that she was told would cost her around $100 a month for unlimited.
I can't tell if that's surprising everyone or,
Well, it's just like I say, there's another player in the game, and you know, I guess for information, when we start talking about towers and potential of building our own infrastructure, at the end of the day, after we go through all the hoops and jumps and all the things that are necessary, are we going to be able to provide what the CRT says a 50-10 service when there's competition out there providing a 25-5? Are we going to be somewhere at the end of the day that our market price is going to be attractive to people that are have other options?
Perhaps just a general comment. Certainly, we've seen the both consumer, small business expectations of bandwidth continue to grow. Certainly, what was acceptable and in the early days of internet service delivery, dial-up to 5.1 service, 5 down and 1 up. The applications driving high-end bandwidth, both in entertainment as well as education and small business applications. Certainly, there is pressure for increasing bandwidth. So, as a general comment, you know, the wireless-based solutions do provide a stopgap and often a quote better than nothing service. But generally, as technology evolves and people's comfort with transacting both business, education, and entertainment online improves, there's perceived to be quite a strong demand for bandwidth. The other bookend on the discussion is generally affordability. That we know from a household income perspective, there is an upper limit on what you can reasonably expect to charge for service and have people agree that the service is valuable to them. In many studies, that's seen as somewhere around approximately 3% of household income is the appropriate threshold for broadband services. So, you know, that may vary across different families and personalities and where they value broadband in their monthly expense budget. But generally, the $100 a month is seen as probably the most, getting close to the upper bound of what is affordable for most communities and most households.
Dominique?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one question I have is that because I know in the next steps that you are looking for feedback from us, I guess, from the connectivity committee. And I speak for myself, but I'm a bit at a loss as to what feedback we can provide you, because right now I appreciate that. So as part of your task, you've collected a lot of information, you analyze the information, you're providing it to us, you're providing a lot of facts, and here are the funding options. Here's what, fiber to home costs. Here's what wireless costs. So I think we've done a good job of having all of these facts and developing a shared understanding. Now I know that what I'm most waiting for is the next part of your task, and is to tell us what would be the smartest utilization of our resources, and resources being a combination of money, energy, political leverage, etc. And so, so in order to get there, so I'm assuming that's where you're going next. What feedback do you need from us at this stage?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And, I think what, at the risk of stating the obvious, I think there's definitely needs, as a committee, demonstrating your, I'll say, policy vision to improve broadband within the county is going to be important. And a vision to provide that, on a widespread basis. So to, if it's not 100% of the households, it's a number very close to 100% of where you feel it's appropriate for the committee and for public dollars to be, dollars and time to be focused on solving the problem. So I think, the past report outlines some, I'll say, non-monetary recommendations around advocacy and facilitation, which I think are, easy things for the committee to consider because they don't involve a lot of time or money, and they have some leverage. Where the real tough decisions come is with respect to investing public money, knowing that there's competition for capital dollars across the county in all forms of infrastructure. Being committed to make an investment towards your vision, knowing that your vision may take several years to accomplish, but allocating financial resources in addition to the to start to address the problem. So there's likely some discussion of how much can the county or each municipality within the county afford on a yearly capital basis to start to make positive investments with public dollars, as well as the investment in time to develop projects such that you're well positioned when the grant funding windows open again, to submit projects and have money allocated from higher levels of government. So certainly we can map out a plan that, depending on investment level and priority, may take 3 years, it may take 5 years, it may take 10 years. And the opportunity to accelerate that through other sources of funding is something that you can take advantage of as you go, but at the very least you have a long-term roadmap to accompany your vision of improving broadband services. The final comment I'll make would be it's normally best practice to align that investment with other economic development strategies within the county. The whole reason you're doing this is to attract and retain businesses and attract and retain residents, and to help the county grow and improve from a GDP perspective, improve the quality of life and the viability of the region. So if it becomes a question of one, finding the money, and two, where do you start? The answer to where you start is likely driven somewhat by your economic development strategy and your land development strategy, being tightly connected to your broadband investment strategy.
Further comments? Dominique?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for those comments. I think certainly my interpretation of the strategy that this committee and the vision that this committee has developed to date is one where we take for granted, like the vision of, high speed to all homes is not our vision. It's a national vision. I think it's accepted as a baseline, at least the 50-10. So I think our vision and for this committee and for the county is to then, so how do we, our vision is to complement and amplify, accelerate everything else that is happening in the private sector and in other levels of government. So, and the opposite way of saying that is our vision is the same, is to achieve, high-speed internet to all homes without duplicating, replicating, and overstepping investments that will likely happen. Because we see that on the long-term care homes, for example, where our ratepayers don't necessarily appreciate where we're having to top up what is perceived as something that should be provided by other levels of government. And so we have concrete examples there. We know that that's the sort of the sentiment in general. And so that's why I'm certainly looking, I don't know if that helps clarify for you. Like, I don't know that this committee has a dollar figure in mind. I think we're looking for input on, so how do we close whatever the gap is, not the gap in service, but is it a combination of a gap in funding, a gap in advocacy, and or a gap in incentives for ISPs to come our way? And so how do we complement, how do we add our piece to the game to get to that national vision?
You want to stab at that, Keith?
Sure, if I may. I would agree. I think there is the next, I'll say, level down is the alignment around some guiding principles around investment, both in time and dollars. For example, just the basic principle of wanting to work cooperatively with the private sector and not duplicate private sector investment with public dollars, I think is extremely key. The private sector are willing partners as long as they see the right business case. The reality in the public sector is there isn't often the right business case. Roads get built without a business case. They get built because of long-term economic development objectives of the region. And I think that's, in many cases in the more rural areas, that's going to have to be the mindset of not a return on investment directly from the infrastructure, but of socioeconomic value of the infrastructure. So that is important, and we can certainly start to detail out the advocacy and suggested principles. We can also, lay out, I'll say a menu of projects that could be considered infrastructure investments and prioritized that allow you to, at least put something in a long-term capital plan. And then make decisions on it as grant funding information becomes available and industry partnership options, become known. I will comment, and I've seen this in many municipalities where the municipality starts to actually allocate money and demonstrate that they're willing to put their own money forward to solve the problem. It oftentimes, I'll say, focuses the attention of the private sector, knowing that there's a serious investment and, maybe a perceived threat to their existing customer base or potential base, and they suddenly, there's a lot more focused discussion on willingness to partner in those scenarios. But it's kind of the old saying, you have to be prepared to put your money where your mouth is in order to see some action.
Duncan. You're on mute.
Mr. Warden. I'm quite happy with the work that this committee has done to this point in time. And I think that our role was to do a full assessment of our county and the municipalities that are in it. Be able to plot on paper what we have, what we don't have, and what we really, really need. And I'm hoping at the end of the day here, what happens is taking that information into context, and that through our consultants and our staff, that we start out first off with a discussion paper that we can present to county council, not with any defined solutions, just a discussion paper to be able to begin having those talks, because we're just a committee. Whole of county council are the people that have got the money, and we need to expand that not only just to county council, but I think that we need to make a concerted effort to have each one of our member municipalities have an opportunity to have a say in this, because it's one thing to put a picture, a map on our report, but I think it's very important that we bring them all along with us. So this is not a short-term fix. I think that it's something that we really have to put some thought into, and we do need to have some really, really good discussions across the county, because if there's money to be put into this project, that we have everybody is comfortable with the fact that they're going back to the taxpayer and saying, for everybody's benefit, this is the way we see forward. Then once we know that there's significant interest from all the players, then we can start putting some more meat on the bones. I think everybody understands the fact that we need a vehicle, but if you go in to buy a vehicle, then, well, you look at the vehicle and, all right, well, we got options to put on this vehicle. So if you have that buy-in from people that at the end of the day, it's something that everybody's comfortable with, I think that we can move forward with this.
Julie, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Councillor McPhail. Just wondering about timing of that, just so that we get it right on our end. Do you anticipate that discussion paper would be presented to council in advance of the final recommendations coming through from IBI? Or what's the, kind of, how did you see this playing out?
Well, my experience has always been, you don't want to get too far ahead of council. We've sat around it as a group here and well versed in a lot of the discussions that have taken place. The reality is some of our colleagues have not had that opportunity unless they've been tuning into the meeting. So I think that we should have that initial report back to council saying, you sent us out as a committee. This is what we found. These are the good things. These are the bad things. We have not come to a solution as of yet, but we want to ensure you that the fact that you have a full understanding and knowledge of what are the actual problems, because if you can't identify the real problem to people that are going to fund it, they have a difficulty in being able to hold their hand up to do that. So I think it's a kind of a multi-stage approach to it, that we want to share our knowledge, not with any defined solutions, because I don't think we're at that point yet. Once county council has an opportunity to look at a discussion paper and make their comments, then I feel more comfortable moving on to the next step.
Julie?
Thanks, Mr. Warden. So the next county council meeting is the 28th of September that we could plan for to deliver some of the information that you've indicated, Councillor McPhail. The only catch is that our anticipated kind of end of work date with IBI is the end of September. So I think we would have to kind of have a conversation offline with IBI to see if there is a willingness or interest, or whether there would be added costs associated with it, extending the timeline associated with this study. And we'd have to kind of reconvene with the committee to work through the details of this plan. But with that in mind, if it is the committee's will, we are pleased to work through these administrative issues in order to accomplish what it is that you'd like to see get before council.
Duncan?
Well, I think all that administration side of it, I know, Julie, you have the capacity to be able to work all through that, but certainly taking what we've got to county council now, without any dollars or any major solution, but taking what we've got to them, I would hope at the end of the day, we can ask the question, okay, this is what we found. Do you want us to move down deeper in this? Are you still wanting to move forward with this? And if they say yes, well then let's take it to the next level.
Being that this is a top priority of county council, I'm wondering if this is worthy of a special meeting of county council just to deal with this. Dominique?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess it depends on the administrative side, if there is some flexibility, whether that's necessary or not. I fully agree with Councillor McPhail's suggestions. I think I would take it one step further so that council has some view on what is being contemplated, as opposed to just a summary of facts, because there's not much to react to. And I find that if we provide a completely open-ended, what would you like us to do? A little bit like I'm finding myself today. So what do you need from me? You tell me, like, what is the question? I find it a little bit more difficult. So if there is an opportunity with what the committee, the direction that the committee has provided to date, if there's an opportunity for IBI to start formulating some of what could be contemplated, then I think we would generate more discussion and reactions and guidance from all of council.
Keith, comment?
Yes, I'm hearing both comments and recognizing them as important. I do think it is important to catch your council up on your level of knowledge and what you've understood. Oftentimes, what I do find is helpful is for us to take this one step further and put forward some draft recommendations. That gives council something to react to, both in terms of strategy and perhaps dollars, and may help, I'll say, narrow the discussion towards a final recommendation.
Julie?
Oh, Duncan first.
Go ahead, Duncan. You're muted.
Agree with both Dominique and Keith. Thank you, Dominique. I was thinking that, but I just didn't get the words formulated good enough to say it. Yeah, people like to have options, and that really kind of will define things down that, okay, we have 3 or 4 rabbit holes. This is the one we would want you to go down and see what's down there. So it certainly gives the committee a bit more direction as to what our next steps are. So thank you very much for that, Dominique.
Comment, Julie?
Yes, I would just circle back to Keith's recommendation, which is to offer some suggested solutions to council at the same time as the presentation of all of the data and information. Just seeking the committee's preference. Is it okay to go right to council with that on the 28th, or does the committee need to see those recommendations in advance and have a meeting?
Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. As a committee member, I think I would be loath to think that IBI and staff would take something to council that hasn't been vetted through the committee, because at least part of the reason we exist, I think, is to do exactly that for the benefit of council. So it would be kind of somewhat blindsiding perhaps of this committee to do that. I realize timelines are very, very tight, but I think the discussion, especially the points put forward by both Dominique and Duncan are all very valid. I think it is time to go to council, but I would certainly, as a committee member, appreciate the opportunity to vet what potential solutions are put in front of council before they actually go there. That's my 2 cents.
I appreciate that. And I think, Justin, you had your hand up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just agree with the fact that we, it's important to deliver our assessment of the problem to county council, but the purpose of this committee as an advisory committee is to provide recommendations, right? Not necessarily to give direction, but some options, right? And I think we wouldn't be fulfilling our purpose if we didn't offer those different options. And if we didn't offer options, the question would come back to us, well, what are our options? And it would just be another meeting down the road. And I also agree with Mike that even if it's a special meeting that we have quickly to review the recommendations, we definitely we need to have a look at those before they go out.
I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding there, and I agree with that statement. Thank you, Justin. Further comments? So we've agreed it's time to update county council. Have we decided when and how?
No, I think we'll take that conversation offline with IBI, because it definitely does deviate from what the committee originally proposed for IBI's work schedule. So we'll have that conversation offline. If there's a need to involve the committee in any sort of discussions or to prepare you for any sort of asks before council, we'll be in touch. But otherwise, I think we'll plan for a special meeting, perhaps of this group and this committee and maybe county council, depending on the timeline we work out with IBI. And we'll let you know by email what those dates and times are.
All right. Again, I see heads nodding. All right. Time to move on to next steps. I guess it was, wasn't it? Are we agreed that item 5 has been discussed? Next steps? We have hit it. I'm looking, do we have any correspondence? Catherine says no, and I believe her. Item 7, new business. I'm not hearing any. We ready to pick a date of our next meeting?
Do it by email, once we have more
To
information,
be determined,
if that's okay.
right? Everyone fine with that? And I'm at the bottom of my page. It says adjournment next. Does anyone have anything to add before we call for it? All right, I want to thank everyone. I think we had a pretty good meeting today. Anticipation coming, so I want to thank everyone for your participation and interest. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Justin, Duncan, Catherine, call the vote, please.
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor McPhail, Mike Andrews,
Yes.
Justin Pennings,
Yes.
Warden Marks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
All right, we are adjourned. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye all.